I believe we are in Genesis 18. That's where we'll be picking up this morning. Last week we finished up chapter 17. And now, I mentioned this last week, but I want to mention it again just so we kind of remember this as we go through these next several chapters. We had about 13 years of time between Genesis chapter 16 and Genesis chapter 17. But Genesis chapter 17 through 21 all go on within the same year. So we have about a year span where a whole bunch of details are given to us, a whole bunch of things happen. It's a pretty clear timeline as far as that goes. We're given a lot of information to know that. So when we go through, finish 17, now we're going on 18 and 19 and 20, 21, all in the same year. Very fast, very, very all together at one time. Not like we've been reading kind of up to this point. There's been a lot of, a little bit of information for a year here, a little bit here, then several years go by and then something. This is all happening all at once. So as we get into the next several chapters here, we're also changing kind of the focus of Genesis for just a little bit. 18 will still involve Abraham quite a bit, but as we kind of get into 19, 20, 21, Abraham is going to be kind of in the background for a bit, and we're going to have more of a focus on Lot and kind of his situation. But I think it's appropriate to go through these because as we go through chapter 18, God saw that it was appropriate to let Abraham know that these things were going to be happening as far as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So I think there's something connected here to Abraham that we should definitely go through. So I'm not going to skip them, even though Abraham's not really the main focus after chapter 18 for a little bit, but I think it's good to go through them. So we're ready to start at the very beginning. If someone could read for us Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 through 8, please.
And the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. When he saw them, and bowed himself to the ground, and said, My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass by on your servant. Do not pass on by your servant. Please let a little water be brought, wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh your hearts. And after that you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. They said, Do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, Quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. So he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate.
Okay, so we're kind of setting the scene here of what's going to be transpiring here in chapter 18. We have, well, first of all, where is Abraham at this point? It says, this is an intro question. Everyone's saying it as quietly as they can. Mamre, thank you. All right. You can speak up. I'm old too. I have hard of hearing. So he's in Mamre, the great trees of Mamre. We've talked about this several times. It's mentioned several times. Mamre, of course, is one of the Amorites of the time. We discussed this a lot in chapter 14. And this would be the area that would become known as Hebron, which would be a very prominent city under the Israelite nation. So he's in this area. He's been there. This has kind of been his hangout for quite some time. He's still there. So I guess Genesis chapter 18 just wants to let us know he's still there. That's why it's mentioned. I don't really have any more to say about that, but that's where he is. And then we're told the Lord appeared to Abraham, and we have these 3, it seems like 3 men that come and approach him. Now, I have maybe some thoughts on how all this is working, because the wording is not super clear of how this is going down. I'm going to discuss it as we get kind of midway or maybe later into chapter 18. But we have three men that approach Abraham, and we have kind of the Lord seem to be speaking through these men. And what does Abraham do when he sees them? Yeah, and then
And he washes his feet, washes the feet, makes a dinner.
he is going all out, right? Now, does he know these men? Doesn't seem to. There's no indication that he seems to recognize them or recognize that they're, messengers from God or anything of that nature. He just sees these three men, and he goes to them and says, hey, come and rest a while, wash up, let me serve you some food. And there's really some kind of interesting details in this that I do want to get into.
Sam, I wonder if the fact that they just appeared next to him, if he wondered had that not been a miraculous appearing.
It's possible, because it seems that one of them may have miraculously disappeared later. We'll get into that. Again, the wording is just it's not clear. They're there. We don't know how close, but he goes to them. So he approaches them at some distance of some kind.
If he's living on this land and his herds are around him and his workers are out there in the field, that there would be the likelihood that someone would say, hey, somebody's coming, you have a visitor.
Yeah, we don't know. And that's,
But it just makes me wonder, the fact that they just appeared next to him, he might have assumed that might have been a miraculous thing.
Perhaps. I really don't know.
Just a guess.
Yeah, and this is the thing. It's one of these stories we wish we knew more about, because there seems to be some more at play here, but we're not revealed to all of these things. But he's extremely hospitable. In the literal term of the word, he is bringing kindness to strangers. Like I said, he's offering to wash their feet, a place to rest. He brings out food to them. This is good food. Bread, beef, curds, milk. Top of the line stuff, fresh meat. He's going all out. And we have Sarah and a servant. They're helping prepare the food. And we see Abraham is himself serving them. At least that's the wording that I have and how I understand it, is he's not engaging in the meal. He's not eating with them. He's acting like a waiter. Now this is, it's a sign of humility here, that he is the one doing it, even though he's the master of, this, he has a big party with him. He's got servants that could do this work. Why is Abraham doing this work? Because he's showing humility. He's showing that he really cares about these men, and he's doing it himself, even though he doesn't have to. I think that's an extremely interesting thing. And again, he's not eating with them. It seems that they're eating, and he's just serving them, making sure everything is taken care of for them.
Samuel mentioned
Go ahead.
About the fact that Lot in the next chapter will treat these angels with a similar type of humility and service. It makes me wonder if it's maybe a cultural thing or a family trait that just may be the way they were, regardless.
I would say a little bit of both. Obviously, if and in these times, it is kind of a Wild West in a way, because you have people coming and going, and you typically stay within your tribe because those are the only people you can trust, maybe. But also, when you do extend that fellowship or that hospitality, that's considered a very grand gesture. I think in general terms, in every culture, to offer help or offer anything to a stranger is considered a good thing. I don't know of any culture where that's frowned upon. Sometimes they may not do it as much, but it's something that is honored. So, and we will see Lot do something very similar. But we see this kind of happen throughout Scripture, where someone offers some kind of hospitality to someone who they don't really know or don't know very well. But it's always shown as a very good thing to do every time it's mentioned in Scripture. It's always put in a good light. Maybe except for, that lady that sticks the peg through the guy's head, later on. But that's a different story. That may be an exception to that rule. I guess that's all I have to say on this. It's pretty straightforward, just a setup. Any other comments on this section of verses up there, verse 8? Oh, go ahead, Arnold. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, as you were saying, the treatment these men received, some versions
at some point, it becomes clear that he does recognize that this is God talking to him. We're not exactly sure at what point he understands that, but certainly, by the time we get halfway through this chapter, he certainly does know that this is God who's communicating to him, or some conduit or messenger of God. Again, the way it's worded, just the Lord appeared or the Lord left, but then you have like these conduits, if you will, or these angels that are kind of interceding, and you're like, well, how is this conversation working exactly? We don't know for sure, and that's the struggle because we're not given those exact details. But what we are told is that the things that are being told to Abraham are coming from God as the ultimate source. So even if these are angels sent on God's behalf, the message is coming from God. I mean, this is God, what he wants to say word for word in these situations. Or is it the presence of God? It's a very unique kind of thing here that we're seeing. Just the way it's worded and how things play out. But certainly when we get to chapter 19, at least two of them, it becomes very clear that they are angels because it says that. Which is why I think probably the third one is too, but is just also speaking directly as a conduit from God. But again, the wording is just very odd in how it relates that. So I try not to be too steadfast because I could certainly be wrong about that. But yeah, it's very unique. All right, very good. Any other comments up to verse 8? Okay, let's continue on. Someone read for us verses 9 through 15, please. 9 through 15.
Then they said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And he said, "They're in the tent." He said, "I will certainly return to you at this time next year. Behold, your wife Sarah will have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. But Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have become old, am I to have pleasure, my Lord being old also?" But the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I actually give birth to a child when I am so old?' Is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah denied it, however, saying, "I did not laugh, for she was afraid." And he said, "No, but you did laugh."
Okay, so we're kind of continuing on this story here. They're eating, they're being served, and basically what's happening here is Abraham and Sarah, they're going to be told some information very directly. It's probably after this conversation that Abraham figures out this is God speaking to him. That's kind of what I think. This is probably where it gets to that point. So Abraham is asked about his wife, Sarah, and he tells them that the visitors tell Abraham that they're going to have a son in about a year's time. Now, verse 11 again reiterates that they're already both old. Abraham at this time is 99 years old, so that makes Sarah about 89 years old. And it also says Sarah is well past the age of childbearing. So even though in this time people are still living a little bit longer than we typically do today, they are considered past that time in their life. So if there's ever any doubt about that, it's saying it again here. And apparently the tent that Sarah is in she wasn't visible because they're asking, where is she? I think they probably knew. But they asked anyway. Apparently she was not within eyesight, but she was within earshot, as we find out. Now, here's an interesting question, and it may be a nothing question, but I can't help myself. Why do you think that Sarah was positioned in a nearby tent to listen to these men? Why would she be not visible but still be within earshot? Do you think there'd be any reason for that?
Well, these were, I believe, customary in those times where women had a certain role, and they were, I think, mostly to serve. So they weren't engaged in company.
Yeah, so that's actually kind of my thoughts. I mean, we could say, well, maybe she just happened to be there. That's where she was when she heard this, or she was eavesdropping. We don't see any indication that she was trying to do that. But kind of an interesting thing, and this is true, not as much today, but not that long ago in Middle Eastern and Far Eastern cultures, where a woman may be in the room or nearby, but she'll be behind a veil or a curtain of some kind, so she won't be seen, but she's definitely heard. One example of this is not really recent because we're talking like late 600 AD. But if you know anything about Empress Wu Zetian of China, before she became the head of the country, she was giving advice to her husband, Emperor Gaozong, behind a curtain. So he would be in his royal court, he'd have people come to him, talk about things, and she'd be behind this curtain of beads or something like that. And then as people are telling him things, she'd be telling him things from behind him, behind this curtain, saying, maybe you shouldn't listen to this guy, or maybe this is what you should do about this. And so there was kind of this idea in his lifetime that she was actually the one who was in charge because she was telling him what to do. But that was a really common thing, is you would have, a woman of any prominence be around, but they wouldn't necessarily be seen as some form of modesty or something like that. It's not really something that's seen much today. There are exceptions, of course. There are some places where you see it, but not as common today. But certainly may have been common in those times. So that's my thought, is perhaps she's there listening, knowing if she needs to do anything or advise maybe, but she is not trying to be engaged in this conversation, but she's on standby, if you will, and perhaps showing a bit of modesty in the situation. It may not be anything thought, but I can't help myself. But Sarah seems to believe that this comment that she's soon going to have a son is ridiculous because she laughs. She thinks, I don't know if it's like really something that's super funny to her or something that she just thinks is so ridiculous, she can't help herself. But she's kind of reprimanded here and is told, is anything too difficult for God? And this is probably the point where Abraham is probably thinking, this might be God we're talking here to, because no one else would probably say something like this. But what's the answer to that question? Is anything too difficult for God? No. And I think that question, immediately they know the answer to that is no, nothing is too difficult for God. They've seen what he can do. We've kind of talked about places or times where God has probably interceded or we're told he has directly, that he's helped them along. So they know the answer is nothing's too difficult for God. So when they're told you're going to have a son in a year, well, it's time to pay attention and believe that this is going to happen. So then, of course, Sarah tries to deny that she was laughing, but she's kind of called out on it. I don't really have too much to say about that other than God knows, even if it's something as silly as laughing, perhaps, at a funny comment, perhaps. So there we get the other promise here, and we're given the exact timetable. In about a year, you're going to have a son. This is not really new information, but now it's very direct. So both Sarah and Abraham hear this. Any comments, questions up to this point, up through verse 15?
Just mentioned that Abraham laughed in the previous chapter.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to say Abraham gets away scot-free either. He did have the same reaction in the last chapter when he was told this information. So they're peas in a pod, I guess.
He didn't deny it, but we can understand how Sarah felt.
It would be embarrassing, I guess. Yeah.
And sometimes we don't want to admit it.
Well, and it says she was afraid in verse 15. She was afraid, so she didn't want to be called out on something, not believing that God could do something. And so I said, well, no, I didn't actually, laugh at that. But then, she's told kind of straight, no, you did. Like, when we fail in these things, we should not deny. Just be like, okay, yeah, I messed up. Let me do better next time.
It's interesting. It probably was not a cackle out loud. It probably was a quiet laugh to herself.
Yeah.
It would be further proof that these men were from God because they wouldn't be able to hear it.
Yeah, that's, and it doesn't say. See, again, this is one of these details. It doesn't say for sure, but that's in my mind is she laughed to herself in a way so that they didn't hear it, but they knew. Otherwise, this would not be something miraculous, because if they heard her laughing, then there would be no miraculous thing going on here, because that would just be a normal thing. Yeah. All right, go ahead, Arnold.
And you would think Abraham probably kind of told her about his encounter. God said, so
there shouldn't be any surprises here. This really isn't new information. It's just being told in a different way. And this is something that God has been doing, and we've mentioned this every kind of step of the way, where God constantly reassures Abraham, like, things are going to happen, you're going to be a great nation, and he keeps getting told in different ways. And Abraham, we know he has this faith, he believes, but he doesn't really understand how it's going to work. He doesn't understand God's timetable or why God is doing it this way, but he's working through it. But he's still a man. He doesn't totally understand why and how and all those details, but he's still sticking with it. Let's go ahead and read then. Someone read just verses 16 through 19, please. 16 through 19.
Then the men rose from there and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on their way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him.
Okay, so I wanted to separate out these verses because there's just some interesting things here that I want to talk about. Because if we think about what's about to happen, spoilers, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham is not in that area. Remember, we've been told at the very beginning of this chapter, he's near the great trees of Mamre, in the area of what would be Hebron. He's kind of on the other side of the Dead Sea. Sodom and Gomorrah would be kind of southeast of his location, mostly east, but kind of south. So he's not over there. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is not going to affect him at all directly. But God seems to think that there's a purpose here in telling Abraham what is about to happen. So we have these three visitors. They're getting up. They're going to leave. Abraham kind of walks along with them, see them off. Again, being very hospitable to the very end. Very, very good guy. But God decides he's going to reveal to Abraham what's about to happen. And he has a few reasons here. And I think they're kind of interesting. I don't really know if I have much to say about them, but they're interesting to note. That, again, he notes that Abraham's going to be a great nation. Of course, that I think is discussing Israel. And that all nations of the earth are going to be blessed through him. Now, how is that going to be the case? How are all nations of the earth going to be blessed through Abraham?
Through Christ.
The fulfillment is through Christ. You go through the genealogy, Jesus, you're either Matthew or Luke chapter 3, Matthew 1 or Luke chapter 3. Both of them will get you from Abraham to Christ. So if Abraham doesn't, fulfill all the things that he needs to do, and, you have the son of promise, Isaac, you don't get that genealogy, or at least not in that way. So God has made this plan, and he knows that Abraham is going to be this important figure. And he also says that he basically wants Abraham to direct his children to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. I don't know if this is the purpose, but it could be that he's kind of making an example for Abraham and his descendants to understand that, look, you're doing good, you're righteous, you're faithful. Here's the people who are not. Observe what happens to those people. It is very interesting when you look at some of the Old Testament texts and how often Sodom and Gomorrah is brought up as an example with the Israelites. They never interacted with the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, really. I mean, you had Abraham, a little bit of interaction, chapter 14. That's it. That is all. But there seems to be here maybe a purpose to show Abraham and his descendants, this is the ultimate destruction of those who are unfaithful to God and who pursue the ways of wickedness. I can't say that for sure. That's me kind of reading into it a little bit. But that would certainly fit with what we see a lot going on as we see these cities of the plain mentioned later on in the Old Testament to the Israelites as an example for this is what you don't want to happen. This is why we don't pursue wickedness, because this is the ultimate destruction. Again, maybe reading into it a little bit, but I think that would be a solid reason for Abraham to be kind of told what's going on here. Of course, there's another reason. We're going to get to it. I'm sure you all know where we're going to go with it, but we'll talk about Lot in just a second. Anything else about just these small section here, 16 through 19? I wanted to note it just because it's very interesting.
Just a parallel that Jesus says in John 15 that you are not just my servants, you are my friends, and that's why I'm telling you what I'm doing. And of course, in the scriptures, in the New Testament, we have more information into God and what he expects of us than people of any time have ever had.
Yeah, that's a good parallel. I like that comparison because, again, I mean, Abraham doesn't really need to know, but God thinks that it is good for him to know, and he sees a purpose. Yeah, and I guess there are probably other examples we could go to, but I think that one's probably the best. Brandon, go ahead.
And so, I know I've gone back to this a couple times, but this shows that God works on his time, not theirs. They feel like they're old. And,
Abraham's been waiting 99 years so far.
but again, they're on God's time, not on man's.
Yeah, and as far as we understand, I believe Abraham was 75 when he was first called to go from Haran to Canaan. So it's been, oh man, now I got to do the math, 24 years of waiting for God to make this promise be fulfilled. Can you imagine waiting 24 years? It's a good chunk of my life. I don't want to wait that long. I'm not that patient. I'm glad Abraham was.
Think about the fact that Moses was 80 years old when God called him.
Yeah, we don't talk about that very much, but Moses was not a young man himself when the Exodus occurred. No, not by any
I
means.
think when you get to your old age, it's not time to retire. That's when it's time to work.
Well,
Not at your career.
I'll figure it out when I get there. All right, very good. I think we might finish the chapter. Here we go. Let's read verses 20 through 33, please. Someone, 20 through 33.
And the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me. And if not, I will know. Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom. But Abram still stood before the Lord. Abraham came near and said, would you destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there were 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? So the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes. Then Abram answered and said, indeed now, I, who am but dust and ashes, have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose there were 5 less than the 50 righteous. Would you destroy all of the city for lack of 5? So he said, if I find there 45, I will not destroy it. And he spoke to him yet again and said, suppose there should be 40 found there. So he said, I will not do it for the sake of 40. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 should be found there. So he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, indeed now I have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 should be found there. So he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak but once more. Suppose 10 should be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. So the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place.
Okay. So, again, we were kind of talking, at what point does Abraham recognize this is God he's talking to? He definitely does by this point. Otherwise, this conversation makes no sense. God is, he's revealing to Abraham that there's going to be this judgment against Sodom. When we kind of talked about this when we went through chapter 14, it's not just Sodom and Gomorrah that are going to be destroyed. Of the 5-king coalition that got beaten up by the 4-king coalition, all of those 5 are going to be destroyed except for one, and that's the one that Lot flees to. We'll get into more details about that. So just remember, it's not actually just those two cities. It's going to be, what's referred to sometimes as the cities of the plain. They're all going to be wiped out except for, again, the one that Lot flees to. And again, we'll talk about that in more detail later. So in verse 22, it says that the men turned away and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. So again, this weird wording here. So it said the men turned away, but the God was still there. And we have these three visitors. So in my mind, the way this works out is you have the three that are leaving. Abraham's walking along with them. And two of them keep going, and one stays behind and is basically the one talking with Abraham. And I believe that two that go on are the ones that show up in Sodom and Gomorrah, or show up in Sodom in verse 1 of chapter 19, where it says the two angels arrived there in Sodom. That's how I see it play out. That's how I understand it. That could certainly not be the case, but that seems to make the most sense to me. Math-wise, that adds up, and that makes sense. Again, it may not exactly be that way, but in my mind, that makes sense. Now, so God tells Abraham what's about to happen here, and Abraham, he kind of has an objection here, that God would still destroy righteous people who happen to be in an evil city. There must be some good people there. Would you destroy them just because most of the people there are evil? This almost kind of sounds like Habakkuk a little bit. Not quite exactly the same situation, but Abraham starts with 50. He says, what if 50 righteous people are there? Would you destroy that city? God said, no, if there's 50 people there, I'm not going to destroy it. And I don't know if this is bartering or just Abraham looking to see where the line is, but he works his way down to 10. That was just pretty significant. He works his way down to 10 and says, if there are 10 righteous people in the city, will you destroy it? And God says, if there are 10 people in the city, I'm not going to destroy it. And then that conversation's over. He doesn't go any further after that. Now this is interesting, and I guess here's a question. Maybe the answer is obvious. Why is Abraham so invested in this situation? Again, if you go back to Genesis chapter 14, he's not really a friend of the king of Sodom. They don't have a good interaction there. So why is Abraham trying to negotiate sort of for the potential saving of Sodom? Because Lot is there. Yeah, it's an obvious answer. There's no trick question here. Lot is there. He's in Sodom. It's a major point, of course, back in chapter 14, when Lot is captured by the four-king coalition because he's in that area. And Abraham goes and sends his servants out, and they fight to get him back. He cares about Lot. Even though he and Lot were supposed to separate ways in chapter 13, he still cares for Lot. Lot is his nephew. He's a family connection. He's become the overseer for Lot since Lot's father died, and then Lot's grandfather died. He's kind of his closest father figure. So he feels this obligation to try to protect him and help him when he can. So Lot's there. And of course, when you get to chapter 19, Lot is in the city of Sodom. He's not just in the area pitching his tent near Sodom. He's in the city. So he's there. Whether or not Abraham knew he was in the city or not, we're not clear about that, but Abraham certainly cares about Lot. Now in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7, we're not going to read it for the sake of time, and we've read it before, but 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7 tells us that Lot was considered a righteous man. So I'm going to do some math here. If we're trying to get 10, we got 1, we got Lot, okay? Now, we're not told specifically if anyone in his family is righteous in his household. In fact, if you look at their actions, perhaps they're not. I would probably argue that they're not, but let's assume they are. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. He would have his wife, his 2 daughters. That makes 4. Okay. Well, let's count the men that he was going to have his daughters marry, the ones that they're engaged to. That gives you 6. That's it. And that's kind of pushing it a little bit, because I don't know if I would consider them to be righteous either, because they don't react to Lot's pleas very well either. But let's assume 6. Well, that's not 10. So and we know Sodom and Gomorrah get destroyed. That's a foregone conclusion. We all know this. That indicates at least to me, that there are no other righteous families or people in the city. It's just Lot and maybe his family, and I don't even know if I would say that. They definitely have their problems that are pretty obvious. So math-wise, it's not going to be spared. Go ahead, Arnold.
Yeah, I think the same thing, that it was Lot and perhaps whomever else in his family he could persuade to leave.
Yeah.
They would have been.
Yeah, he's not able to persuade his future son-in-laws to leave. So it's just him and his wife and his 2 daughters that leave. His wife turns back. She turns into the pillar of salt. We're going to have a great conversation when we get to that point. And then by the time he and his daughters escape, well, I'm not going to do too many spoilers, but they do some pretty bad stuff. And, you know, I don't know what I would do in Lot's position at that point. We don't really know what happens after that. But, you know, maybe 6, and that's really asking a lot. But yeah, the indication that I get from that is there are no other righteous families. There's no other righteous people in the city. It's just Lot and maybe his house, which, 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7 kind of talks about how Lot was in distress being in the city. And if you're the only righteous person around, that's a tough place to be. You got nobody else around you who's going to encourage you. Again, his own household probably didn't do a good job of that either. We'll talk about more of his family when we get to chapter 19, but it certainly seems like a pretty bad situation.
Sam, remember that there's no Bible during this time, so the spiritual bar is pretty low compared to what it is today with us. And so we look at Lot, we can't imagine how he can be righteous, but he probably would not be if he were under the New Testament. But God had not given all the various commands and moral code restrictions that we're given. And Lot apparently did have a sincere heart. We can see that as he's in Sodom. And I want to talk a little bit about this idea about the fact that God blesses the righteous. In this time period, since God didn't have a real close relationship with mankind in general, there was no law or anything like that for them, Bible, or for them to read and come to understand him. These people must have been extremely wicked. And one of the primary ways for God to show that he was with someone, that he blesses someone, would be with temporal blessings. Now, today, God is with us, and the righteous will be blessed, but not necessarily by money and things like that. It may be spiritual blessings. And whatever it is, we demonstrate our faithfulness to him and our love for him by how we live our life. And but the idea is true that God blesses the righteous. Now, Job had this debate with his friends over the same matter. Mm-hmm. They were thinking only physical blessings. And Job knew it was more than that, even then in Job's day. But it is a statement that is true. You will be blessed if you serve God faithfully.
And I don't have any reason to doubt what 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7 says about Lot. Otherwise, I'd have some other problems I'd have to work out. But when we do see Lot doing things, I mean, he is hospitable in chapter 19. He tries to get his family out. I mean, he's trying to be a good dad, even though that doesn't seem to work out very well at all. His biggest issue is that he just makes a bad decision of where he decides to go after he leaves Abraham. It's really that one decision that puts him on this path that a lot of really bad things happen to him in his time. Now, Lot does seem to have some, I'm not sure what word I'm looking for. Things seem to work out in a way. He does have 2 great nations that do come from him. Ammon and Moab are nations that come out from Lot. And they should have been on good terms with the Israelites, but weren't. So they kind of become adversaries. We've kind of talked about that before. But all indications, aside from this one bad decision, Lot seems to be doing okay. You know, it's this one bad decision. And this can happen to us. You know, even if we are faithful in everything else, we may have one thing that trips us up. And we may have a lot of consequences in our lifetime because of that. I make a bad decision of, career path, or where I decide to live, like Lot did, or who I decide to make friends with, or who I decide to marry. Those are big decisions that can put you on a path that leads to a lot of difficulties. Even if you do everything you can to be righteous, there's going to be things that are going to come up because maybe we made a really unwise decision. I think we're really hard on Lot because we see kind of what happens to him in chapter 19 and 20 and all that, but he seems to be a faithful man, and 2 Peter 2 indicates that he just made a really unwise decision there, which is really unfortunate.
He proves to us that no matter how many foolish things we do in life, if we don't quit, if we keep coming back to God and making our life right through Him, following His teachings, that we will be righteous.
And God, even though He does destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, He goes and He saves Lot. So He saves the right, when Abraham is talking about, well, are you going to destroy the righteous with the unrighteous? No, God gets the righteous out of there, as much as they're willing to get out of there. So he is extracted from that, even though things don't turn out very well, really. Well, we'll get to it. I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to stop. Go ahead, Arnold.
Yes, and I just want to say, this sort of reminds me of today. You need some influenced by his uncle. I mean, he had great people that were around him, so he kind of knew what to expect and basically who he could probably lean on. But you could say that he was blessed in that realm too, to have people around him that were doing the right thing and trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I think Lot probably, he definitely learned some things from Abraham. That seems to be pretty clear to me. But then when Abraham's not there anymore, he doesn't have that same support. There's no one else there doing righteousness. It's just him, and that is hard. Let me say one real quick thing before we close up. This is not to say that we should stop being righteous if everyone around us is unrighteous, because I think that is the wrong lesson to learn from this. I think the lesson is don't put yourself in a situation that's going to lead you to a path like Lot, where things are going to go very badly. That could be a very wide assortment of things. I'm out of time. That could be a whole lesson in itself. Just the last thing I want to mention at the very end, the Lord leaves Abraham here. And again, this wording is very strange. Does he just disappear? Does he walk and go on his merry way? We don't see this third person, if you will, show up again. It's not like the two guys that show up in Sodom in chapter 19. So again, we don't really know how that works out, but we do know that the Lord, at least the presence of the Lord or the messenger of God, leaves and Abraham returns home. Next week, we're going to start chapter 19. Again, this is where the focus is going to be more on Lot. We're going to see the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Basically, this chapter 19 is going to be mostly about Lot here. So we're going to read about that. I think it's important to do so. So if you want to go ahead and get ready for next week, we'll start chapter 19. I don't think we'll get through it all. It's fairly lengthy. It'll probably break up into at least 2 weeks, but we'll get started.